That's a great question. It's something that has been getting a lot of attention recently, but I think that I think we need to reframe it a little bit before starting to answer the question that you want to get to. So I think first of all, and Ines talked very nicely about this a couple of minutes ago, supply chain finance is a tool. There is no morality that exists with it. There's no ethics to supply chain finance. It is a simple tool of financial practice, rather like foreign exchange or an interest rate swap. There is no morality that is associated with that. It's simply a contract under which, or it's a mechanism under which a buyer, a supplier, a funding source, and quite probably a platform come together, and they meet each day in order to create a system of mutual benefit for all of the parties that are associated. I think what Ines talked about a few minutes ago around the growing transparency, I think that the work that FASB and the International Accounting Standards have done recently is to be applauded. I think that it is exactly the kind of direction that the industry needs to be going. We need to be creating greater transparency. There is no disinfectant like sunlight to get rid of some of the bad practices that once in a while have crept into many parts of the financial services industry, of which supply chain finance has been no more immune to bad practice than other areas. So we see supply chain finance evolving, developing, but always within the context of the fact that it is a tool, and how it is used is then up to the practitioner as to how it gets deployed. So now to turn to your question about the role that supply chain finance can play in ESG, and whether there is if you like, a virtuous cycle that can be created between supply chain finance and an ESG, a set of ESG commitments that corporations around the world will increasingly have. I think the answer to that is to give the very clear upfront answer. The answer is absolutely yes. There are very virtuous circles that can be created between the collaborative benefits of supply chain finance and the overarching commitments that companies and their suppliers, and very often their funders, are making towards a transitioning economy that is designed to build resilience. When we talk about a transitioning economy, I think we need to talk about three separate items. And they're three items that are all running in parallel, but on very different timetables. If you imagine, sort of they're like planets orbiting at different speeds. There is the first transition, which is the one that is most commonly associated with the ESG agenda. And this is the one of an energy transition as we move from a carbon-based economy to one that is very much more reliant on renewable energies. This is something that is going to be measured in, frankly, in decades. The kind of zero emission targets that countries are setting now are set around 2030, 2040, 2050. This is measured in, as I say, in decades. The role that supply chain finance can play in serving this is apparent, but it's not going to be immediate. It is there in terms of providing long-term collaborative sources of liquidity for buyers and suppliers. The second transition, and one that I would say is measured in quarters and years rather than decades, is that of the transition from the post-Cold War world of rapid globalization to a world in which the geopolitical alignments and considerations are becoming a lot more complex, a lot more hostile, and whether we're moving towards a world that is seeing active deglobalization will remain to be seen, but we are certainly seeing a world in which there is greater consideration to the fact that supply chains may, over the previous decade, have become too stretched, too lean, and that there needs to be a focus on what is now being termed reshoring or friendshoring, whereby supply chains are brought a little closer to home. This presents a clear need for supply chain finance because those producers and suppliers that are now being asked to scale up their production need the capital and the liquidity to support that expansion of their businesses and activities. And supply chain finance is very clearly and demonstrably playing a very important role in those initiatives around a changing global geopolitical situation as we speak. The third transition is that of a world from a very stable, benign, and central bank supported capital market environment to one in which characterized by very low levels of inflation and by extremely low interest rates and costs of capital, to one with very much more normalized costs of capital and accelerating rates of inflation. This transition is measured in days and weeks. It is having devastating consequences across large parts of the capital structure for particularly for suppliers that are stressed with their liquidity. It's been compounded during 2022 with the transition from LIBOR to term SOFR measures of interest rates. And it is again one in which supply chain finance has had to step up to the plate and provide liquidity in abundance for suppliers that are otherwise becoming stressed by these situations. All of this comes together to say that absolutely supply chain finance plays an integral role in all of these transitions. It builds resilience and thereby builds the support that is required for each of these elements of environmental, social, and governance considerations around corporate commitments.